coming 30 minutes, we are going to talk about behavior. And Andrea and myself, we are both trainers and consultants at Xebia. And well, we could talk about behavioral change and behavior in general for days, but we won't. So we were thinking, what can we do in 30 minutes? So our goal here today is to spark something, to inspire you to think about behavior and behavioral change in a slightly different manner than you are doing now. So that's what we're going to try to do. But we're going to build our confidence a bit first. So please raise your hand if at this point you are involved in some kind of transformation, change initiative, something along those lines. Great. Thank you. How's it going in general? Well, so please again raise your hand if within that context you are seeing certain behaviors that you'd rather not see, that you would rather like to change. Yeah. All right. So anyone who can give us an example, what would you like to see changed? What are you seeing that you're not liking a lot? Yeah, that's indeed one of the classic examples that we have. Fear of making mistakes. Yeah, we saw a couple of examples in your talk just yet, so I like that. But so thanks for sharing. I think from what we've seen from our experience, you are not alone in that. A lot of organizations have some similar problems when it comes to behavior. And one of the things that they always seem to have in common is that transformations or change initiatives cannot really be successful without also a certain behavioral change that comes along with it. We need to change something in behavior if we want this transformation to succeed. So what we see happening a lot in organizations is we think long and hard about certain transformations. We need something, we have this end state in mind, we have a vision where we want to go, and we think long and hard about why this is important. And once we are done with that, as usually in leadership, we are going to share that with the rest of the organization because we want to involve the organization, of course. And then we organize kickoff events, presentations. We are standing on soapboxes and we're going to explain why this transformation is so important and why it's so crucial for everyone to embrace it and what we expect from them. Well, weeks go by, months go by, and not a lot has actually changed, or at least we are not seeing the behavioral change that we were envisioning or that we were expecting. Well, that's a problem. So how come, right? And then we think, well, maybe we didn't explain ourselves well enough. Maybe we didn't provide enough examples. Maybe we weren't clear enough in our message. So what we see happening, we do it again. We're going to again organize presentations, sessions, sending out newsletters, organizing other events, and we're going to again tell why this transformation is so important and why everyone should embrace it, because there's so much in it for you. There's so much value and benefits in it for you. Nothing happens again. So this becomes a vicious cycle. I could go on, but we have 30 minutes, so I won't. This can become a vicious cycle. And of course, some things might change, but usually they are lucky shots. And the reason why this happens is because there is not enough focus or not the right focus on the crucial aspects of human behavior and then looked from a behavioral science point of view. So imagine we are going to do this whatever transformation you like. I don't really care at this point. And then very often we hear organizations say, yeah, we need a change in mindset and we also need new behaviors. That's a pattern that we see. And because we don't want to scare people away, we would like to involve them. We would like them to embrace everything. So what we very often see people do, and especially leadership, unfortunately, is using container concepts. We are going to need transparency and commitment and engagement and open collaboration, communication, direct communication. All sorts of container concepts that from a best intention are aimed at making this message and the thing that's upon us, because this transformation is super complex and big, trying to make it a bit more simple, easier to grasp for people. But in that attempt, we are actually making things more complex, and we're going to tell you why. One of the first problems with this thing is that mindset is not the same as behavior. And the concepts are very often mixed up and used at the same time in sentences and organizations that we see. But a mindset is this secret thing, this thing that exists. I cannot really see it. It's there, but it's all happening internal. And apparently I can have the right mindset, or I can have the wrong mindset. I can have an agile mindset. I can have whatever mindset you envision for your transformation. But it's all happening internally. And it could trigger me to act in a certain way. It could trigger me to behave in a certain way, but it doesn't have to. Behavior, on the other hand, from a behavioral science perspective, is what I can see you do or hear you say. So mindset is not the same as behavior. Just to be very clear on that for this talk. Another problem is that we are oversimplifying behavior. As said, we do this usually by using these container concepts. And it's all from good intentions. We want to make things easier to grasp, easier to understand, categorize some stuff so that the message is easier to handle and there's not a lot of information that you have to take in at the same time. But by doing that, by using these container concepts, we are classifying a lot of different behaviors in one of these concepts, in these container concepts, and thereby we are actually making things even more complex. So there's the irony in that sentence. For example, Agile Manifesto. Fans of the Agile Manifesto here in the room? Yeah, same here. I'm not bashing the Agile Manifesto, by the way. I wouldn't dare to do that. But the thing with the Agile Manifesto is Agile is a huge and complex matter. So what we tried with the Agile Manifesto, let's see if we can make this easier to grasp, easier to understand, convey the message in a fun way that it's also not overwhelming and feeding resistance. So we came up with values and principles. And they are awesome and they are great and they are very good intentions and ideas behind that. But they are also full of container concepts. Self-organization, feedback loops, collaboration. And my all-time favorite is we are welcoming changing requirements. From a behavior perspective, and behavior, what I can see you do or hear you say, what does that look like? What does it mean to welcome changing requirements? Every time a product owner comes in with change requirements, we throw a party, or, I mean, could be very fun. But if I would now ask Andrea to please welcome changing requirements, what would you do? Yeah, in terms of actual behavior. And the thing is, with these container concepts, they are all so open for assumptions and interpretations in terms of behavior that it will make things way more complex in the end. And that's obviously not what we want. So we will have to specify what all these concepts mean in terms of behavior that you want to see. Same goes for leadership, right? We want our leaders to be servant leaders and they need to connect and empower and engage, be vulnerable. And I agree with all of these statements. But at the same time, what does it mean? What does it mean when a leader is a servant leader? And more importantly, maybe, why does a leader need to be a servant leader? I mean, with your transformation, I hope you had something in mind with a goal of a result or an end state where you want to be. And then why is this the right leadership style? What do you expect from a servant leader in order to get to your results that you want to achieve? So knowing more or less what it means to be a servant leader, that will get you into trouble. Because then in the end, you will have conversations, for example, at the end of year with your manager. And well, another example, taking ownership. Maybe at the end of the year, your manager is saying to you, well, I was expecting you to take a bit more ownership. And then you're like, yeah, but I did this, this, and this. But your manager had a completely different expectation when it comes to behavior of taking ownership. And that's why it's so important to specify these things. New values. That's also something that we see a lot happening with transformations. This transformation requires new company values or new team values at least. And again, I'm a big fan of values, company values and team values. I'm not bashing anything here. But they are container concepts. And very often they are used in that sense. So transparency, integrity, taking ownership, entrepreneurship. Last week in one of our trainings, we heard a company where fun was a company value. And I'm pretty sure that fun means something different to me than it does to the person that was in our training. So you have to specify in terms of behavior. I mean, otherwise you are just having these values and you can hang them on walls, on posters on walls and expect everyone to live up to these values. But if you haven't specified it, it won't work and it will lead to a lot of frustrations. Sounds great, right? All these concepts and these container concepts and values. And again, very good to use, not against it, as long as we specify it and as long as they lead to certain results. And that's exactly what we do every day at our customers. Because these concepts are, they are very open for assumptions and interpretation. What you classify as transparency, someone else probably won't or has a completely different idea about that. So what we're actually saying is that we should start unraveling the complexity of behavior instead of oversimplifying it by using these container concepts. And if you are using the container concepts, make sure to specify that. And Andrea is going to tell you some techniques where you can do that.
Yeah.
But the thing here is like behavior, very complex. At the same time, we know it's crucial for transformations, and yet we are oversimplifying by container concept. So yeah, that's something that strikes me, and that what I help my customers in improving. So check question for yourself, and I'm sure it doesn't hold for you. But if you are using container concepts, or if you're seeing them around you, then starting from tomorrow, please find out how you can specify them. We're going to dive into our theater of complexity. That's where we are going to unravel the complexity. The first time that I did this talk was in Greece, so I went with a Greek metaphor, but it still works, I think. And within this theater, we have a couple of starring actors. And basically, all of the actors are container concepts that I just mentioned, and we will mention a few more in this talk. We're diving into two of them, leadership and resistance. And we're going to start off with leadership. So as said, very often we see that transformations need a new style of leadership. We need something different from our leaders, because that will help us realize our vision. The thing is, there are a lot of different leadership styles, and leadership styles are being added, I want to say every day, but I'm going to be a bit more nuanced. So let's say every few months, there's a new leadership style du jour. What does it mean, agile leadership? If we're in an agile transformation, I've heard it at our current customer, we need agile leadership. What does it mean, and how is it going to help me in achieving my results? Transformational leadership, transactional leadership, servant leadership. I'm sure you can think of a whole lot more styles of leadership at this point. But the thing with these leadership styles is that very often an important ingredient is missing, and that is, what does it mean in terms of behavior? What can I expect as a leader when I'm doing this? What's expected from me? What are people expecting from me? And how are we going to align on that? And yes, it's a lot of work, and it takes a lot of time to define that and to specify that, but in the end, it will definitely help you. And by doing that, you will stop with this oversimplification of leadership. And that's exactly what we want to do. Same goes for resistance. And I'm guilty of this as well. I've heard myself say a couple of times, why are people so resistant to this? Why aren't they just coming along? Why can't they just embrace this? Why can't I just see some more commitment, some more engagement? And that's also what organizations say a lot. But the thing is, resistance is actually one of my favorite container concepts, because this is full of assumptions and interpretations. There are a lot of different behaviors that you see that you classify as resistant. So maybe when a whole room is sitting like this, looking outside the window or looking at their phone every 5 minutes, then I can think, wow, they are disengaged, bored, they don't like this, they are not embracing the change, there's some resistant behavior. But actually the only behavior that you're seeing is someone sitting like this, looking outside of the window and looking on their phone. You classify it as resistance because it makes it easier for you to understand what you're seeing. And that makes sense because we have a lot of information to process on a daily basis. But that's what we do. And you need to ask yourself, why am I interpreting what I'm seeing as resistance? So the behavior that you're seeing, that's objective. And that's what you need to watch out for. So whenever you find yourself talking in terms of resistant, and people are resisting the change, ask yourself, what is it that I'm actually seeing that makes me think that this is resistant behavior? And there could be thousands of reasons for the same behavior that you're seeing. There could be thousands of reasons why people, if they are actually resisting the change. And it's your job to figure out how that works. So again, same with leadership, we oversimplify resistance where we should unravel the complexity. And that's exactly what we want to talk to you about, where we're going to give you some tips. So I'm done being the bad cop. So now,
good cop coming in. So you heard already that we are struggling with a lot of these container words in our daily job, and then leaders ask us, okay, how do we get rid of them again, or at least how can we then simplify again? And this is a really big trigger word for us. Simplifying complexity is just a wish coming through, right? So instead of simplifying, we need to specify. And I'm going to help you a little bit on how to do this as a leader, how we can get rid of these container concepts and focus more on the behaviors that we are actually trying to generate in our organization or actually get rid of in our organization. But a first disclaimer, we are of course not magicians. So thinking that we magically can change people is a myth. We cannot change people. So that's my first disclaimer. What we can do is use behavioral science and try to understand why people are behaving a certain way. And we can help work with these sciences and see, okay, so if these people are behaving this way, what is in their environment that is influencing that behavior? And how can we change these environments? So my first disclaimer is we're not trying to change people. What we can do, of course, is change the environment that they are acting in. And why is this so important? Well, first of all, behavioral change is just not about you. And the reason the not is in between these brackets is the only way behavioral change is about this if you are looking at yourself, at your own behavior. But as Evelyn already said, a lot of the behaviors that we see in our companies is impacting us as a person, right? So if we have a person that's constantly interrupting us during a conversation, that does a lot of things with us, right? It frustrates us. We get angry about this. But if we look from a perspective of the performer of this behavior, the person who's interrupting, they probably have a very good reason to do this. And this is really the key to start unraveling this complexity, right? If we understand why these people are doing these behaviors, what is in it for them, what are the positive consequences for them of interrupting us during these sessions, then we actually start to unravel what's going on, and we can actually change their environments and see if we can either stop a behavior or change the behavior to something that's more desirable for us. So what can we do? So let me give you some key concepts here so that we can get started as leaders as well, but also just to have a perspective on, okay, how does this environment of behavior then looks like? The first one we already mentioned a couple of times. We do not want to simplify our organizations. We do not want to simplify the behavioral concepts. We want to specify. And what does this mean? Well, there's 3 things we can specify. These are the results, the behaviors, and the contexts that we are living in. First of all, behavior specification is really about what can I see someone do, or what can I hear someone say? And it's always good to ask the question, like Evelyn just did now with me. If I think I have a behavior described, let's say better collaboration, and ask yourself, how does that look like? Because if I would ask you now, all of you, to show me how to better collaborate, there might be different answers there. So this will be the same for your teams. So it doesn't mean that it's bad that there's different answers to this, but it does mean we have to clarify, specify which behaviors are then involved if we want to better collaborate. Another one that I also like as a site reliability engineer, what's reliability? What does that mean? Do we then all of a sudden act more reliable? But what does that look like? Do we put the incident tickets on our name? Do we follow a specific procedure? What are the behaviors that are needed to make sure that we have these container works grasped as a group of people and then actually know what we're supposed to be doing? And also the results, of course, be very important, because we show behaviors because we are trying to achieve, hopefully, a certain result. We're trying to get somewhere. And only way to get there is if we all show the right behaviors together as a group. And then, of course, the last one comes in, context. How does that group look like? Where do they work? Are they sitting together? Are they working online? What is in their environment that is influencing this behavior? Because behavior is very influenceable, because we all learned from beginning of on how to act. We all learned from a young age not to touch the hot stove, because the consequence of touching a hot stove is a burnt hand, is very unpleasant. So stay away from hot things, we all know this. But we've also learned that if we walk towards a door and there's a handle on it, and we push down the handle and then move it around, this door will open. And it's probably a desired result if we want to enter somewhere. So think about the behaviors on a level where, why do we want to show these behaviors? And even unwanted behaviors that we see is probably something in there for the person who's showing that behavior that makes them want to show the behavior in the beginning. There is a positive consequence in that environment for them. And why is this so important? Well, as leaders, we often trying to either maintain good behaviors, right? We have these example people in our organization and we want to maintain the behavior that they're showing, or we want to decrease the behaviors that we do not like, or at least change them into something more desirable. So understanding how the current behaviors are working and how our environment is influencing these behaviors will really help us to create the future behaviors that we want to see as leaders, and really unravel these concepts about, for instance, collaboration or more openness. So really important to know what your consequences of the behaviors entail for the person there. And that's the second point I really want to make. It's always about the perspective from the performer. So the person who's showing the behavior, that's important. What it does with us is not very important at that moment, because that person will show that behavior as long as there's a positive consequence for them. So if we have this person who's interrupting and they're constantly interrupting us, that will not change, because that person apparently has a positive consequence for this. So figuring out what that positive consequence is can either help us remove it, or we can actually put a different kind of behavior there to make sure that they still receive the same consequences. And this is really scientific. And as Evelyn already said, this does take some time, but it really will help you to understand these resistance that you are experiencing and take away all those assumptions that you're having when this is happening to you. It's not about you. It's really about that person showing the behavior. They are showing this unwanted behavior that you are perceiving as unwanted because there's something in it for them. And now we kind of walk into the pitfalls of leaders, because these are concepts that are really from a scientific point of view. But as leaders, we are constantly dealing with behaviors in our organizations. And we're actually stepping into some of the pitfalls already. So let me walk you through 3 of them, and hopefully this will give you already a trigger to maybe reduce some of them. So the first one I want to talk about is focusing on everything that happens before the behaviors. So if we look into the science, there's a lot of stuff we can do to trigger a certain behavior. And then after behavior, there's always a consequence. So either it's a good one and we want to continue our behavior, or there's a bad consequence and we will stop the behaviors that we are doing. In an organization, we do a lot of stuff in the triggering part. So before a behavior even happens. And these are the soapbox conversations. These are the presentations. These are the times we send our people to training. We are trying to trigger the right behaviors for them. But unfortunately, the consequences will dictate whether or not they will keep this up. So we are focusing all our energy and everything that we can do before a behavior happens. But after that desired behavior happens, we kind of lack the follow-up of it. We don't follow up on, okay, but what positive consequences were there for you, and how can I as a leader maintain this? So this is the first pitfall that I want to warn you about. All of those triggering is very good if you want to start up a first behavior, but think about what happens after behavior to make sure that it maintains. The second pitfall is focusing on negative consequences. We have a lot of threats and deadlines in our organizations. And the risk of this is that we will have some sort of behaviors working towards those deadlines. But if we have a deadline, the behavior will probably only rise very quickly close to the deadline. People will start all of a sudden work very hard to reach that deadline. And as soon as the deadline is reached, they stop their behavior. So think about writing reports, right? We always put it off, and then straight before the deadline comes, we really work hard and fill in all this paperwork. And then afterwards, it drops off again, and we'll wait till the next deadline comes along. This is because there's a negative consequence. If I don't do it, I get punishment. In organizations where we come into, we see these a lot, and we're trying to transform leadership and say, but what if these behaviors become more constant? If people want to perform these behaviors? And then you have to think about, okay, but what makes people want to perform? It's again in those positive consequences for them, right? So why would they want to show behavior? Because there's something in it for them. And then we actually already step towards the third one, because this is always a risk. Because when we're talking about positive reinforcement and positive consequences, what happens is, then we celebrate with a cake after the project is gone. Then we go to this trip after the end of the year when everybody has hit their sales target. We are starting to reward those results. Whereas in behavioral science, we know rewarding is something really different than reinforcing, because rewarding doesn't really link towards the behaviors. Plus, rewarding can be very different for different people. I already can tell you, if we would celebrate a project successfully and we have to go to a restaurant and spend the whole evening with colleagues, some of our colleagues will not be happy, right? They rather spend that time with family. So the rewarding actually tends to kind of facilitate only a part of the group. Plus, rewarding most of the time is done from the perspective of the person who's giving out the reward. Whereas the reinforcers are always from the perspective of the person that is behaving. So these are the 3 pitfalls that I want to warn you about. And now you're probably sitting in this audience thinking, okay, great, now what? So we're not expecting you to use the behavioral science straight away to get everything right? But just this talk is hopefully already triggering you to think about behavior a little bit more different, to think about your container concepts, to think about, okay, so what do I actually expect from my people, and start specifying what you want them to be doing, what you want to see them doing, what you want to hear them say. And Evelyn will now quickly give you the kickoff
to wrap up a little bit.
Lunch.
Yeah. and then you can go to lunch. That's your positive consequence. So what we hope you remember from this talk. So first of all, as Andrea already mentioned, you can start off tomorrow with your own role. I mean, as a leader, informal or formal, wherever you are in the organization, there's probably some fuzziness around your role. So if you are using container concepts yourself, if you're seeing them in the conversations that you're having with people within your organization, try to find out where is the behavior where are the container concepts and how can I specify. So for example, we hear this one, yeah, we want our leaders to empower people. If this is something that applies to you, and I can imagine because it's a very important one, then ask yourself, okay, so what does that mean? What do I see someone do when he or she is empowering people? What does it mean? Show me. If you can show me, then it's behavior. And yes, it will take time. But this is actually how you start unraveling that complexity of behavioral change. So to summarize, start unraveling complexity, stop oversimplifying, look at your container concepts, focus on positive consequences. You're not a magician, you're changing environments, not people, and behavioral change is not always about you. You have to know when it is and when it isn't. It's not your job to define what positive consequences are for other people. That's always from the perspective from the person showing the behavior. It's your job to figure out what those positive consequences are for that person, and based on that, change the environment in a way so they can actually show the desired behavior. And that marks the end of our talk. So, that's it.